Dean never planned to change the city's criminal history, he only wanted a quick score. But when Mark and Jacob broke into a quiet warehouse one rainy night, their simple theft unleashed a chain of chaos that exposed a powerful underground network and turned three petty thieves into the center of a citywide storm. It began on a gray Tuesday morning when the air felt unusually still, the kind of morning that hides trouble behind its quietness. In a forgotten part of the city, a rundown electronics warehouse stood like a relic of another time. Its metal walls were faded, its windows clouded with dust, and its parking lot mostly empty. Few people noticed it anymore, which made it the perfect target for Dean and his two partners, Mark and Jacob. They were small-time thieves, known only to those who moved in the city's back alleys and pawnshop corners. This job, Dean promised, would be simple: one quick night, no violence, no witnesses, just in, out, and gone before sunrise. Dean had been watching the warehouse for weeks, learning every pattern. The guard was older, careless, and often spent his shifts watching videos on his phone. The security cameras looked ancient, their lenses flickering every few seconds. Everything about the place seemed easy, almost too easy, but greed dulled his instincts. The group met that evening at a nearby parking lot, loading their van with empty duffel bags, gloves, and a few tools. Their hearts pounded, not with fear, but with the thrill of what they believed was a guaranteed success. When night fell, the sky was heavy with clouds, the moon hidden behind layers of gray. The city around them buzzed faintly with the distant hum of traffic, but the industrial district was silent. They moved like shadows through the side gate Dean had unlocked days before. Inside, the warehouse felt enormous, endless rows of boxes stacked high, with the faint scent of dust and metal. The air was cool and stale, every sound echoing in strange patterns. They got to work quickly, slicing open boxes and filling their bags with whatever looked valuable: phones, laptops, and cameras still sealed in packaging. Time seemed to move slower with each grab, every minute filled with the quiet rhythm of theft. None of them spoke. The only sound was the soft rip of tape and the dull thud of items being packed. But in their haste, they didn't notice the tiny red light blinking above a far corner of the room. It wasn't part of the old system Dean had studied, it was new, installed just weeks before without his knowledge. A hidden surveillance unit silently recorded everything, transmitting each movement to a private security server. While the thieves thought they were invisible, the city was already beginning to wake to their mistake. The first sound was so faint that none of them reacted. It started as a low hum somewhere deep within the walls, almost blending into the whir of old ventilation fans. But within seconds, it grew louder, sharper, until it split the silence like a scream. The alarm wailed through the warehouse, echoing off every metal surface. Dean froze, his heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. Mark dropped the box he was holding, and the crash only made everything worse. The red emergency lights began to flash in rapid bursts, painting the room in violent color. Panic replaced the quiet rhythm they had worked in moments earlier. Jacob stumbled toward the exit, shouting over the blaring siren, but the noise swallowed every word. Dean's careful plan, the one he had trusted so fully, was unraveling faster than he could think. The old security guard, who had been half asleep in the front office, jolted awake, confused but alert enough to grab his phone and call the police. Within moments, his shouts could be heard echoing down the hall as he tried to figure out what was happening. Dean signaled for the others to grab whatever they could and run. There was no time to think, no time to gather everything. Boxes were knocked over in their rush, scattering electronics across the floor. The clang of metal and the shriek of the alarm mixed into a chaotic soundtrack of disaster. Jacob fumbled with the back door lock, his hands shaking too hard to work it open. Dean shoved him aside and yanked the handle until it gave way, the door flying open into the cold night. They burst out into the alley behind the warehouse, the sound of the alarm chasing them into the open air. Far away, they could already hear sirens, real ones this time, growing closer with every heartbeat. Mark's foot caught on a loose wire, and he stumbled, spilling half his bag onto the wet ground. Phones and chargers rolled into puddles, their metallic glints catching flashes of red light. He wanted to stop, but Dean yelled for him to leave it. They ran into the maze of dark alleyways, their lungs burning, their minds spinning. Behind them, the warehouse blazed with flashing lights and noise. The guards stood outside, waving frantically as the first patrol car screeched to a stop. What had begun as a quiet robbery had exploded into pure chaos, and there was no turning back now. The streets were alive with noise as the police spread out across the district, their sirens cutting through the still night like warning cries. Dean and his crew darted through narrow alleys, their footsteps splashing in shallow puddles left by the evening rain. Every corner they turned seemed to lead them deeper into confusion. The industrial area that had once looked familiar now felt like a maze with no exit. The glow of flashing lights reflected off the walls, and each echo of a siren made them flinch. Dean tried to keep calm, forcing himself to think clearly, but fear gnawed at his focus. He knew the police would have surrounded the area within minutes. The sound of helicopter blades soon joined the chaos above, sweeping beams of light across the rooftops. Mark, limping from his earlier fall, struggled to keep up. Jacob, younger and faster, had already sprinted ahead, disappearing into another alley without warning. Dean wanted to shout for him to come back, but he couldn't risk the noise. They were trapped between panic and instinct. Jacob's decision to split off turned out to be a mistake. A passing patrol spotted movement near a dumpster and turned their lights toward him. The sudden brightness froze him in place. Before he could even think to run, officers jumped out, ordering him to the ground. Within seconds, he was handcuffed and surrounded. The rest of the crew didn't see it happen, but the shouts and car doors slamming echoed far enough for Dean to know one of them was caught. He and Mark kept running until they reached the edge of an old factory lot. The place looked abandoned, its windows shattered, its walls covered in rust. They slipped inside through a broken door, their breaths heavy and uneven. The air inside was thick with dust and the smell of oil. Dean gestured for Mark to stay quiet as they ducked behind a row of machinery. For a brief moment, the sirens outside sounded distant again, almost gone. It felt like they had finally found a place to hide, but safety was only an illusion. As Mark shifted his weight, the floor beneath him creaked loudly. Before he could move, the weakened boards gave way, and he plunged through with a loud crash. The echo rolled through the entire building like thunder. Outside, the police heard it immediately and turned their searchlights toward the source. The chase wasn't over, it had only just found them again. When the police stormed into the factory, their flashlights cut through the darkness like blades. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling around beams of white light. Dean stood frozen behind the machinery, his pulse pounding in his ears. Below him, Mark groaned from the pit, his voice weak but loud enough to draw attention. The officers moved quickly, spreading out through the echoing space, their footsteps steady and sure. Within seconds, they found Dean crouched in the shadows. He didn't fight. The moment the light hit his face, he knew it was over. Hands went up, and the cold bite of handcuffs followed. Mark was lifted out of the hole by two officers, his leg twisted painfully but not broken. The thieves were done, caught before they could even catch their breath. The police began to gather the evidence, bags full of stolen electronics, crowbars, and gloves smeared with dust. But when they went through the loot, one officer noticed something odd. At the bottom of a ripped cardboard box were stacks of money, neatly wrapped in plastic. Hidden beneath them were small metal cases filled with fake identification cards and unmarked weapons. The discovery shifted everything. What had seemed like a simple burglary now pointed towards something much darker. The stolen goods were no longer the focus. The question became, who had hidden these other items? The warehouse, it turned out, wasn't just a place for storing electronics. It was a front for a much larger criminal operation that had been running unnoticed for years. The thieves had stumbled into the middle of something that reached far beyond their petty ambitions. As officers continued searching, more evidence appeared: documents with coded lists, account numbers, and shipment schedules. The information linked the warehouse to a network of traffickers operating under the radar across several cities. The police realized this robbery might finally expose the organization they had been chasing for months. Dean listened silently as they spoke, his mind struggling to process what was unfolding. Outside, more patrol cars arrived, sealing off the entire block. News began to spread through the police radio of a major breakthrough. The thieves, who had planned only to steal electronics for quick cash, had accidentally triggered the collapse of a powerful underground ring. Their mistake had become the city's biggest lead in years, changing the direction of the entire investigation. By sunrise, the once forgotten warehouse had turned into the center of a media storm. Police vehicles crowded the streets, reporters gathered behind barricades, and flashing cameras captured every angle of the unfolding story. Inside a small interrogation room, Dean sat alone, staring at the blank wall in front of him. The weight of what had happened pressed down harder than the handcuffs around his wrists. His plan had been small: just a quick theft to make some money. But now, his name was tied to one of the biggest criminal discoveries the city had seen in years. Mark lay in a hospital bed under police guard, his leg wrapped in bandages. Jacob, the youngest, had already confessed everything during questioning, hoping for a lighter sentence. None of them had ever imagined their night would spiral into something this massive. Their simple crime had blown open an entire underground network of illegal trade, revealing connections between warehouse owners, corrupt officials, and criminal suppliers across multiple cities. What started as chaos in the dark had now become headlines in every newspaper. Investigators spent days combing through the evidence found at the scene. They uncovered millions in laundered money, fake passports, and documents, exposing those who had been hiding behind legitimate businesses. Arrests followed quickly, spreading across districts as more names surfaced. The man who owned the warehouse, a respected businessman, was arrested on charges of organized crime, fraud, and smuggling. The thieves had unknowingly done what the police hadn't managed to do for years: expose an entire criminal web. Dean listened to the news reports from his cell, every word feeling like both punishment and irony. His reckless decision had destroyed his freedom but helped uncover corruption that had poisoned the city for years. The same mistake that ruined him had saved others. Some officers even called him lucky, though he didn't feel that way. He knew the line between accident and consequence was thinner than anyone realized. When the noise finally faded, Dean was left with silence again, the same kind that had started it all. The city would move on, the headlines would change, but his life would never return to what it was. What began as a simple theft had turned into chaos that reshaped everything it touched, proving that even the smallest crimes can open doors no one ever meant to unlock.